I'll take a roll call in the order I see you. David Cohen. Here. Leah Mulhern.
Here.
Jennifer Lohman. You're muted.
Here.
Dan Schultz.
Here.
Charles Burdell Williams.
Present.
Julie Haywood.
Present.
Zachary Epps.
Present.
Pam Henry.
Present.
And Joel Fishbein is present. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the May 3rd Financial Affairs Committee meeting. Do I have a motion?
So move, Charles Burdell Williams.
A second.
Second, David Cohen.
All in favor of approval of those minutes, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. I'll turn the meeting over to Mr. Linderman for the presentation.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, here we go. Okay, let me just whiz right through here. So here's the agenda for tonight. We're going to talk about kind of in one thing. We're going to update the 21-22 budget, and we'll also review the 22-23 budget. We have the final reconciliation of the student activity fund accounts. We've been talking about that for a little bit, and we want to share with you a chart that's attached, which shows how we're going to how we have to handle that in accordance with not only your policy but the state guidelines and GASB, which is the Governmental Accounting Standards Board guidelines. We're going to discuss the transportation contract. We put lunch prices on the menu, or on the menu. we put lunch prices on just so we could go over the prices, as we and we also have the demographic study from the Montgomery County Planning Commission, which actually just received today. So, and then there is as you saw from earlier, there is a giant list of a lot of routine agenda items that are kind of every year for the finance section, and we'll go over them too in case there's any questions. So budget review. This is the budget as it stands right now, the total budget, and also the estimate for this year. So this is kind of everything in one for you. This is the very high level. This is what we call kind of super function level, which are the thousands level. So you see most of your money still comes from the state, or from local sources. I'm sorry, a little bit from the state. We're going to talk about how we've adjusted the state a little bit this time. There's been some adjustments to the local also, and we'll talk about expenditures. Not much adjustments to the expenditures. We will talk about the retirements that we've taken out for this year, and the other financing is the debt, what we have in there. So just another way to look at the budget for this year and next year, and the current estimate. I will note, I should have noted it on the last slide, the last month's budget was 127,600,000. It's 127,100,000 right now, and we'll talk about the reductions for that, how we got to that number. Here's our state money, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between the governor's budget in 2022-23 and what we're actually going to budget, which we've increased a little bit. And I have a chart that was provided by PASBO that helped schools give what I'll call a better estimate toward the budget. And most schools are using this. Most schools are using the conservative version of this, which is what we're doing. So we will continue on. This is an estimate from what PASBO has put together. And PASBO, for those that don't know or remember, it's the Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials, and are the PASBO staff. They have quite a few people that are pretty tied in with the up at the Hill almost daily and talking to people. This formula enabled us to drop down and pull out the Cheltenham information for the budget for next year and compare it with the budget for this year and show what we might budget. So if you look up in the top portion of this, and let me back up a little bit. Last month's budget, we budgeted no increase in the state subsidies. We budgeted exactly what we were expected to get this year. So there was a slight increase over the current year because we were budgeting what we're actually getting this year. So up in the state, up in the top, the statewide basic education funding formula increase, as you may or if you may or may not remember, the governor has actually proposed a over $1 billion funding formula increase. Well, that's probably not going to happen. There's probably some other things happening. However, the PASBO staff and the people that work with the legislators in Harrisburg feel that by doing something a little more than what we got last year, but not the gigantic increase that we would be expecting from the governor's budget, we increased the basic education funding formula by $300 million, which is actually $100 million more than it got last year. And the state level up money, which you actually get no state level up money. If you were a poorer district, you would get some state level up money. And special education funding increase of 50 million, which I believe in the original budget was a couple $100 million. So based on that, we were able to increase our budget compared to the original budget to 5.7 million, which is an increase over the 21-22, what we're expected to get by $300,000. And the special education went up just a little bit more, and it's about $112,000. So we've plugged those numbers into revenue, and that's why you're going to see some reductions in your millage estimates. One of the reasons you'll see some reductions in your millage estimates. I'm going to go over a few other things too for you. These are the adjustments we've made. We did talk about the TIF for the Elkins Estates of $170,000. We had pulled that out already. We reduced the 5 teaching positions for retirements. We did talk about the property tax reduction allocation. That was a pretty big increase this year, 600,000 for Cheltenham, which will result, there's a slide a little later, results in an $80+ benefit to all the taxpayers in the school district. Based on the interest rates going up, we had our interest rate budget at $10,000. We have increased it to $50,000 because the interest rates are going up. Now they are not big, but the interest rates were closing in on 75 basis points when 3 or 4 months ago we were actually budgeting thinking we might get 1 to 5 basis points on our money. So it's going up, and the more it goes up, the more we'll be able to adjust during the year next year and possibly for the next year's budget. Now, interim taxes, we have increased it by a little bit more than we had in there, and the main big increase for keeping the interim taxes high, that's where we put the monies for the older tax appeals that are paid under a payment plan. So we still are getting money from places like Linwood Gardens and some others that Ed Diazio has made agreements to have them pay because they're so big, have them pay over several years. So we have a couple more years left in that. I will tell you the mercantile tax is pretty high this year. I actually had to do a double take on it and get some more backup on it when I saw the number. We are at just under $600,000 in mercantile tax. And in a normal year, we're usually in the low 300,000s for the total for the year. So we increased it. I had increased it a little bit. I increased it by a little bit more, not a lot. So it's at the highest amount you've had mercantile tax at as far back as I can find in your budget. So at 375,000. If you have another year like this year, great. And you know your new business manager can make adjustments to it for next year based on that. But the mercantile tax is a tax we split with the township, you know, based on kind of revenues generated from certain businesses. Delinquent taxes have been increasing too. We do have an agenda item on there on at the very end about porting off. There were some changes made to the way they can collect. So we need an amendment to their contract, and there's a couple attachments and an agenda item later. And again, we had the state subsidy increased as we talked about. So these are the what I'll call non-recurring revenues that are in the.
Chuck,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to go back to that slide because everything that you talked about being increased were positives. The decrease of, except for the real estate tax revenue, that's a negative 170. But the delinquent tax increase means we're collecting less money, right?
No, we're collecting more of the delinquent tax.
Okay.
So yes.
I needed that clarified because I wasn't clear. Okay.
Sorry, we were used to collecting, we had budgeted $2 million, but again, this year we were already at about $2.4 million. And we anticipate that the collection rate seems to be higher. Maybe it's because the economy is better. Maybe it's because you know, people don't want to pay the interest and the penalties on the delinquent taxes, but it seems to be working. And a lot of school districts, in addition to Cheltenham, are seeing the same thing with an increase in the taxes. So last month, I think it was Dan wanted to see the kind of two items. We have non-recurring revenues. These are the Esro revenues. We have some Esro funding in for this year. And I have a list of what's made up of that on the next slides, 2 slides, I think. And we have about 300,000 embedded in the interim taxes for the tax appeal settlements that are, excuse me, paid over several years. This is what's in the budget for Esro for next year. Now we can, if other things happen, we can always handle them and just get more revenue for them if we had to do it, if things escalate. But if you recall last year's budget, when we approved the budget, you approved using Esro funds for the, I call them late buses, the after school busing, so that students could continue to stay after school for activities and tutoring or whatever. And I'm not going to read these. You can go through these. These are on here. These are the things. And I don't profess to know what some of these things are. You'd have to ask somebody else. A Nearpod subscription would be somebody else would have to explain that. But again, if you have any questions on that, I'm sure, you know, if you don't want to, if you want to just kind of punt them over to Dr. Scriven, he'll be able to get the right person to help you. And then here's some more stuff. It's a little intensive, but we wanted to share what these things were that were included in the 22-23. We do have into 23-24 and a little tiny bit into 24-25 to be able to spend this money. So it's not like hurry up and spend it next month. It was meant to kind of guide out over a few years for schools. This is the budget. This is kind of the nuts and bolts. This is the super highest level of the budget you can see. So you see what the budget is right now as we stand, with the additional revenues and with the reduction in expenditures for the retirees. We have a difference of about $2.4 million. It doesn't mean we're going to run a deficit. We're not. However, that would require millage to fund it of 1.6%. It would be your lowest increase since, I think, and we have that on a slide later, maybe it's 2017-18. and you could have actually raised taxes to 3.4% if you remember the Act 1 index, which we have on a slide later. So we are much reduced. So this is just a comparison of, it's a 1.6% increase in your proposed final budget for your millage rate. And here's the slide I was telling you about. So you have to go back to actually 16, 17 to get a lower increase than this year. So and I will tell you that it's a lot of schools are seeing some rebound, a little bit of rebounds in some of the revenues. This is the impact of the 1.6% on the median family home. That's the homestead exemption thing. So it's $116 a year. And when I talk I think it's the next slide, tells you what the homestead exemption addition will be for this year. That number will actually get down to less than $30 for the median homeowner. And the median of, there's the mean, the median, and the mode. The median is the exact middle of all of your taxes. It's not the average tax assessment, it's the middle of all your taxes. If you laid them all out side by side, it's the middle one. And here's what I was telling you, the homestead, we talked about this last month. The homestead credit that you'll get for next month, you actually get like a $10,000 some credit on your assessed value of your property, which will relate to $529, which is an $86.87 increase over last year. So when you go to the slide before, you take 87 away from $116, and that's what the net increase will be, and you take the 86 from each of those. So not a lot of change here, other than we had, the retirees are pulled out. This is just talking about what kind of the big impacts of the budget are. We're still monitoring the benefits. The medical and prescriptions seem to be kind of rising a little bit for us. Some schools are seeing the opposite. Some schools are seeing like us, but we're kind of rising. We have a few what they call high impact claims right now that are causing to push us right to the stop loss limit. This is an estimate of the fund balance. May actually be a little bit higher than this, so I don't want you to be too excited if it ends up coming in higher. So we've kind of laid out what is proposed to be done with the fund balance. The unassigned is actually exactly 8% of your $127,100,000. And then the rest, we did increase the capital project number a little bit, if it's okay with you guys, as we really need to start talking about a capital project planning and funding, and possibly even putting a line item in instead of doing it this way to the budget, so that it just becomes a little bit more easier and more transparent for you to fund the capital reserve fund for the what I'll call smaller large projects. The very big projects, like doing a complete renovation of a building, you'll need to borrow money for, but this would be to continue the things like Tim was talking about before, the roofing repairs, the glycol repairs, the lighting projects, things like that would fall into this. Just for those that, OPEB is other post-employment benefits. It's another GASB thing that we're required to set aside some funds to do. We have some pending tax appeals that are not to our favor, that may be settled, that we have to accrue money for. And then we have some other legal items, which could include anything. This is the fund balance kind of chart from comparing last year, this year, and the years before. I will tell you, our chart for the last 2 years looks pretty close to most other schools' charts. Most everybody else was seeing kind of a reduction in expenditures and a little bit of an uptick in revenues, thus increasing their fund balance. I believe you're going to start to see the expenditures start to catch back up to the revenues again, and all the years of not spending because of COVID, unless something happens, is going to go away. And the revenue will probably become more of a stable type increase that we can either count on or budget accordingly for. This is the budget calendar. Again, we are at the bottom here. We're in the home stretch. Tonight, this is the kind of final review of it. We're going to have the budget on the agenda for next week. I do believe you'll have to pull out, we'll check with Mr. Diazio. I think at the very least, you have to pull out the original budget resolution to be approved by itself. And it would have to be, if you kept the others in consent, it would have to be approved first, or pull them all out. It may be just as easy to pull them all out, but we'll check with Ed on that. Now, student activity funds. All right, first, do you want me to stop, Joel, and see if there's any budget questions? I don't want to jump on to the next thing here.
I appreciate that suggestion. Please raise your hand if you have any questions about the budget. Mr. Cohen?
Yes, this is related to the budget. You can just provide an update about conversations with Villa Nova. I took an intentional pause there, not the university, but the insurance consultants, about where they stand in terms of process and if we've learned anything meaningful.
I know that Lou has been providing them with everything I think that they've been asking for. So it was going to be a process that would not have happened for this year, just not physically enough time. So this is something that, my guess is if anything's going to happen, if they think there's any kind of chance of doing something better for us or changing, that we would be jumping on that sometime, late summer, early fall, to make a change for next year.
Okay, that's fine. That's my only question. Thank you very much.
Ms. Haywood?
Thank you. Mr. Linderman, could you go back a couple of slides where you had the charter school cost increases? Yeah, no. Right there. Yes. So I just want to make sure I'm looking at the large cost changes, non-salary. Is there an overlap between the charter school cost increases and the contracted services where you have charter schools listed twice? And if so, what portion of
of that contracted services, that it is a little confusing. So the charter schools are in there twice, but it's only once. So you can pull the money. If you look at contracted services back here. Now I can't even see it. So you see you have a $1.4 million increase in contracted services. That's 500 category there. Mm-hmm. So you're correct. I've kind of talked about it twice. I probably should have.
So basically the 1.4 is the overall.
1.4 is overall. Without, if there were no increase to charter schools, contracted services would be $975,000.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Mr. Schultz.
Thank you. And just, I'll say this again at the legislative meeting, but thank you for the sheer amount of effort, energy, iteration that has gone into this budgeting process. I'm so pleased with the idea that we're going to be able to meet our financial obligations, also our district goals for the next year, while also maintaining one of the lowest that I've been on the board tax increases that in some time. My question, and I apologize for not thinking of this question earlier, and you probably don't have an answer, but in past years, I think there was some survey, an anonymous business manager survey of sort of roughly how many districts are likely to go to Act One, how many districts are going to be below and above. Do you have a sense how a 1.6% tax increase might be comparing to other districts in the county?
Yeah, I'll have to check on that.
Okay.
The one.
Yeah, no worries. In fact, I mean, I'm curious, but I don't think it will be relevant for it's not relevant for our vote. Our numbers are our numbers, but I am curious just from a narrative perspective, because obviously residents are interested in tax rates and comparative tax rates. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Mr. Epps.
Thank you, Mr. Fishbein and Mr. Schultz. I second the sentiments. I even went to look back last month. It was 2.8%. So 1.6 is certainly less than 2.8. And even which is a difference I saw of about close to about $150 to $200 over the course of the year. So certainly second those sentiments. And also I appreciated seeing examples of expenditures, but investments, right? The types of investments that we're able to make with the ESSER funding. And I just have just 3 follow-ups to that. The first is the examples that we're seeing. Are these were these someone informed by, I believe, a survey that went out about what community members, how they thought we should use ESSER funding? Is the list that we see here informed by that as well?
So I'll answer that, Mr. Linderman. So to my understanding, this was, I don't want to quote say a survey, but this was work done by the interim superintendent in terms of meeting with multiple stakeholder groups, as well as internal administrative and other faculty and staff to determine what the request would be in terms of how to go about allocating ESSER funds based on identified wants and needs. So that's how that was developed. Since my onboarding, I've really been doing a crosswalk and trying to calibrate that what was asked was what was represented, and is it a true reflection of where we want to be in terms of moving forward? So that's really been a process to point.
Appreciate that. Thanks to the work. This is really, this is what authentic community engagement looks like. And so thanks, Dr. Smith, and to your team. And also this is a really strong area in terms of communication. As we message, these are the types of investments that are being made at the school district. There is a clear link to what different stakeholders are saying is a clear need for students and schools, and then this is what we see. It leads up to what we see in terms of investment. That's a very strong message to take out to those very same stakeholders and others. Another follow up to there was an example, one of the examples spoke to some guidance counselors, I believe it's slide 13, guidance counselors and teachers for the emotional support, about somewhere around $32,000. Is that towards staffing, or is that towards some like instructional tools that they're using for the lessons? I'm curiosity.
So I'm going to defer to Dr. Smith or someone from her team to fill that question.
Can you repeat the question again, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so it says, yeah, no worries. Guidance counselors and teachers, that third instructional support will provide lessons. And so that 32,000, is that going toward staffing of the guidance counselors and teachers, or is that going toward tools that they'll use for those lessons?
So those lessons not only are inclusive of the tools and the resources, they're also, that amount also accounts for external partnerships that we have to bring in additional staff to help specifically around the pandemic. As we have discussed numerous times, as well as Mr. Linderman has communicated, we're trying to offer human resources that do not require us to make a permanent commitment and to add to our ongoing budget. So these external resources allow us to have somewhat of a temporary solution during the pandemic years and the immediate post-pandemic years. And then we'll, make sure our people are trained to continue these services as much as possible. But this allows us to stay away from committing to permanent resources that we are unable to fund at this time.
That's great. And you kind of already got to my next question, which was some of these things look like it's recurring, like subscriptions to certain services and things like that. And so for things like that, it looks like sometimes I don't want to make assumptions. I like to make things explicit. And so for things like that, it looks like we'd be able to absorb those costs when appropriate. And then there's already some strategic thinking, to your point, around what could be what is a temporary use and what can we absorb without adding cost in the future. So thank you. I appreciate that foresight.
Thank you, Mr. Epps. Ms. Lohman.
Thank you, Mr. Fishbein, and thank you, Mr. Linderman, for the presentation so far. Just as another question about the ESSER funding, have some of this money already been spent? Is this ESSER or is this allocations for future? I just asked that because I'm trying to, we had ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3. Is this representative of like the ESSER 3 funding?
This is and Dr. Smith can correct me if I'm wrong. This is a combination of ESSER 2 and 3. ESSER 1 is done and closed out and spent. Okay. This is ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 or ARP, whatever you want to. The American Recovery Plan. So yes.
Okay, and we have till what, 2024?
Yes.
For that, okay, all right. So some of this we have a few more years for. Okay.
Yes, we do.
All right, thank you.
So I had a couple of questions. If you could go back to the homestead exemption slide.
This one or this one?
Well, this one for
okay.
now. The tax relief per homestead is this year $529.06 as listed, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Then when you go to the next slide, it says, no, not that slide, maybe the one before. That. It says the median assessment is going up 116. Oh wait.
Well, that's what your tax increase will do to that.
Okay, so the 1.6 millage % increase will increase a homeowner with a $142,000 assessed home by $116.
Yes.
So why is this not a realized tax cut? Because, oh, go back, now I see. The difference between last year and this year's homestead exemption is the $82. That's what you were.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Right. So you take the $86.87 off of that 116. So most taxpayers will see a very small increase, it's a shame if we could have just come up with a little more, the median home would have maybe been zero.
Right. And we could also do that math for people.
We could.
Yeah. That it's effectively a 0.4% increase or something like that. It's a very low increase net of the homestead exemption.
Yeah, and it's kind of the homestead exemption it doesn't matter what your house is assessed at, it's $529. So you could live in the biggest house in the township or the smallest house in the township, you get $529 credit.
Good. All right. I should know that, but now that I do, hopefully more people understand it. And maybe I just was the only one who didn't understand it. Mr. Epps, your questions made me think of what I see you posting about participatory budgeting. That seems like what you were getting at, and I appreciate that your questions were designed to point that out and to indicate that we are doing that, at least with respect to the Esser's funds, which was money that came to us that we did need to spend, and we are spending it wisely and with some participation from the stakeholders. So I appreciate that observation. And in terms of the guidance counselors and emotional support, am I correct, Dr. Smith, that that's mostly coming from Effective School Solutions? Is that where that money's mostly going?
Correct. And we also have other external organizations providing social emotional support at our K-4 buildings. So ESS is at EP, and the other 4 organizations are at our 4 K-4 buildings.
Thank you. That's all I had. Mr. Schultz, you have a follow-up?
Yes, I just wanted to, when we were talking about the reimbursement, I wanted to confirm / highlight that increase in reimbursement is expected to be a one-time thing. Is that correct, Mr. Linderman?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
The reimbursement, the homestead reimbursement, the increase in homestead reimbursement, the additional dollars, is that expected to be kind of a one-time $80 boost?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
It would be political suicide for legislators, because if they reduce that next year and you have a 0 tax increase and everybody has a increase in their property taxes because of the legislators, that'll be bad. Now, that being said, if you recall a couple months ago, I was the one moaning and groaning that you hadn't had an increase in so long. And there's all these casinos and, all these people pulling the slot machines. Well, you don't pull the thing anymore on the slot machines, you push the buttons, but where was our money? And so they finally have given you some of the money. My guess is it's going to be hard to go backwards on that. And I'm not saying it can't, but if they go backwards on it, there will be a lot of people.
That's great to know. And actually, I had misunderstood that, so I'm glad I asked. So we really can do the math that Mr. Fishbein is suggesting if we want to say that functionally the increase is. So thank you.
And our ups and downs are more of an allocation ups and downs. The total pool of money was the same for, the past, 8 years or whatever. It's just that depending on the way they allocate it, we got a little tiny bit less last year than we got the year before, but in 2000 whatever, we got more. So way back there in 2014-15 we got more, in 2015-16 we got more. But so next year we might get a little more, a little less, we might get a little more. It shouldn't be substantially less, again, unless there's people stop gambling for some reason.
And Mr. Cohen, we may never get done with board questions, and I'm not trying to discourage them. I just keep thinking we're done, and then up pops the hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is probably a bit premature and also hypothetical, but if we do get more money in a meaningful way from the Commonwealth, then I hope there's somewhat of a plan will happen after the fact in terms of what to do with that money. Again, it's premature, but I would like to think that if we do wind up getting meaningfully more money than we anticipate from the Commonwealth, where there's some chance of that we plan that money accordingly, probably after the fact, on what to do with it versus just not wasting the money, but versus just spending it on a number of items that maybe we want but don't need. So I just want to put that there as somewhat of a rhetorical comment. Again, looking favorably at what probably slim chance could happen, but could happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Well, I would suggest that for purposes of discussion in a public meeting, we could, if there is actually a $1 trillion increase or $1 billion, whatever the big number that the governor would like, if he gets that, and our share of that comes to us, that we should definitely be considering lowering tax rates, because that would indicate a shift to greater state funding, which would permit localities to tax property less, which is a better way to fund schools. And it's more equitable, and I would hope we would move in that direction.
Yeah, and again, I will say that the people at PASBO have kind of done a lot of homework on this and are more comfortable at the lower levels, and that some of that excess money is going to be diverted to be used with more one-time kind of funding schemes. Because if you give us $1.3 billion this year, and then next year you don't have that money because it's really a lot of one-time money because there's a gigantic surplus at the state level. If you don't have it, it's not recurring. It'll be a problem. We had that happen back with the 2009. We got stimulus funding when Obama sent money to everybody, and Rendell back patted the state subsidy, and then all of a sudden we had no money for the state subsidy, and they were claiming the state subsidy was going up, but it actually went down by a lot that year. So I think there's some care in that, because it's not too many, 10, 14 years ago, whatever it was, that happened. So that's where they're looking at kind of history, and there's enough legislators that have been in their seats long enough to remember that I don't think they'll do the big increase. But again, if they do, unfortunately, Joel, it's they won't have a budget till June 30th. So you have to send your tax bills out. You almost can't do it. You can't make a change, and then you're a week or two later and you start dealing with cash flow issues.
Oh,
So,
I wasn't for a second suggesting that this was for this year. I thought that if the governor's budget passed and there became this structural difference in the way that education's funded in Pennsylvania as a result, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Not something different from that.
And unfortunately, if you remember the slide, we were getting no level up money. None of the extra money to level up the those are meant for the Chesters, the Coatesvilles, the Reddings, the Yorks, the Harrisburgs, the schools like that.
Ms. Haywood, you raised your hand and then lowered it. You're good?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no further raised hands, going out to the community, the attendees, three of you, do any of you have questions? If so, please raise your hand and we'll give you the opportunity to ask your question. Seeing no raised hands, we can move on, Mr. Linderman, to the next agenda item.
So we have attached to the agenda here, or attached to your agenda in the attachments, is a spreadsheet showing what we need to do to bring the accounts in line with your policies, state regulations, and the Governmental Accounting Standard Board's proclamation number 84, which basically says, it kind of in a nutshell, we're eliminating a bunch of accounts of student activity funds. If it's an account fund that does not have officers. So what does that mean? We had about 15 or 20 accounts for school sports teams. They don't have officers. I mean, technically you can count the captain, but it's not in the spirit of what this is supposed to be. It's that it's kind of performance arts people, your drama club, they do not have officers. So if they don't have student officers, they have to be eliminated. Any activity accounts that have been dormant for over 2 years will be zeroed out and collapsed into the corresponding school that they came from's budget for next year. Now, just to be clear, the sports teams can still raise money if they want. It just has to all funnel through the general fund, so that there's no accumulating money, there's no negative balance money. And this is something that we actually have to do. The auditors put us on notice last year for not having some other things in line, but this will bring everything into line. And you'll see an agenda item at the end we'll go over that'll talk about, what's happening. We did try to work with every activity that kind of had a little angst this year in the past month or two, and that seems to have calmed down. Booster clubs can still be formed and support things like the drama guild or sports teams. However, they must get their own EIN number, employee identification number. They cannot use the Cheltenham school district number that we use on all our bank accounts. They have to get their own accounts. In most cases, a lot of schools, most of the booster clubs actually even just file for a 501c3. So when people give them money, they're able to get a write-off if it's appropriate. So that's that. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay. There is one question there.
Ms. Mulhern?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Linderman. Thanks, Mr. Fishman. I was glad to see that it looked like some of the money for the students that we had talked in previous meetings about how much they were allowed to hold over and things like that. And I was concerned, if it would be enough, and it looks like it is. So I appreciate that. Can I just clarify? It sounds like you're saying that student groups that did not have leaders, student leaders, whether they were for sports teams or the arts is where it was happening, were those active groups that were fundraising this year but just didn't have leaders? Or because it sounded like those were separate from the groups that were kind of
some of them were, yes, and some of them had pretty big negative balances, so we're going to be kind of collapsing those negative balance ones into this too. So
right.
Now it'll be the building principal's responsibility. It'll be part of his or her budget to say, hey, we don't have the budget, or we have the budget for you. They will still be able to, in the case of a performance arts type thing, they can charge for admission and raise money and do better things. It's just all the expenditures and things must flow through the general fund. We cannot have a separate fund. We're not going to be allowed to have what they used to call fund number 81. We can't have that anymore. It has to be in fund 10, which is our general fund.
So a club that's not sports or arts related can have their own student account and raise money and spend money, but a sport or another activity like drama or choir could not do that unless they go through the principal.
Right. But those kind of clubs can have boosters. So where I came,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So where I came from, like every sports team had their own booster club. So we had no sports accounts like you have here. And same with our drama club had its own booster club. So they really didn't need it. The booster club kind of ran a lot of things for them and helped them with things. But also the class funds, we're closing that out. If you kind of read the agenda item, which we'll get to at the very end here. We're following your policy. We have to close out all those old class funds. The class of 21, we're actually going to close that one into the class of 2025 because that's what your policy says to do. So we will be doing that. The other ones had negative or small. There was a couple with some negative balances. We're trying to make sure there was enough funds that we don't have to backfill with regular general fund money to close these accounts. So we're trying to get everybody trying to get everybody started kind of right for next year. They should be, every year they're supposed to fill out a student officer form and submit it because the officers would change, yearly. I mean, generally your student council, of course, you have student council president and things like that. So that account is one of the few accounts that will be permitted to have, in addition with the class accounts, an almost unlimited carryover because it is an account that benefits all the students. If you remember me describing a couple months ago, these clubs that kind of run year to year, like the ski club or something like that, and if ski club has officers, they can have an account. They don't have officers, so we're closing their account. But if a ski club had officers, they would have to close their account out almost every year because you're supposed to raise money and collect money and spend money on the students that participate that year. So really only your student government account and your class accounts have kind of carryovers that benefit the same students year in and year out until they graduate.
Sure. Okay. I guess the difference to me would be that the boosters, like you mentioned, and if that's how we have to run, because that's what, we're legally required to do, I'm not arguing with that. But a booster would often, that's organized by adults and parents and the community. That's not the students. The students can't go file for a 501c3 on their own and get a bank account. So it does, it is a little different. I'm not arguing, but there is a difference there. All right. Thank you. That helps a little bit.
Okay. Okay, we have on here to discuss the transportation contract. I don't know if Dr. Scriven, do you want to do this or you?
Now I'll kind of jumpstart us. Basically, we've been having some dialogue with Eric Faust, who is the current transportation provider. He was requesting not 22, 23, but the following school year, a 20% increase, which we just could not agree to. We've had a couple follow-up conversations with members of the co-chairs of the finance committee. I've brought Ed Diazio into the conversation. We are looking at potentially a 10% with incremental percentages of right around 4% over those following 4 years, where he would still get close to the 20, but not all in one lump sum. I've kind of passed the baton to Ed to have him really kind of negotiate and try to work through the details with Eric Faust. We wanted to put this as an agenda item just to give an update, and I'm waiting for some specifics around the numbers from Ed, which I can share with the full board. So as part of the agreement, we are looking at potentially extending the contract beyond the first 5 to an additional, which would be closer to a 10-year. In that latter 5-year, hopefully looking at no more than a 3% increase for every year. He is willing to make a donation to the Ed Foundation as a gesture of his commitment to the partnership. It would take us well over a year to try to secure an alternate vendor at this point. He is well set up. He has vested into the Cheltenham district, and we're just really trying to work through negotiating the logistics of the numbers. So I do have 2 board members who do have a level of familiarity, which would be Mr. Fishbein or Mr. Schultz, if there's anything that you feel needs to be added at this point, or you, Mr. Linderman, based on the last meeting that we had. So that's where we are high level right now.
Mr. Schultz?
I actually have a question, despite my familiarity. So thank you for that summary. It does align with my understanding as well. Also, I see Mr. Faust is in attendance, so hello. One question is around timeline and timeline for this decision. We are looking, I assume, at the legislative meeting in a week as the decision point for this. Correct? Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Dr. Scriven. That was my only question. And I guess I will just add that this has been a conversation. It's obviously been an agenda item on this committee for several months in a row, and I'm glad to see the progress that we have made in that discussion with Cheltenham's transportation. I think we're moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Ms. Haywood.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for everyone's work on the transportation contract negotiations. One question I had, to the extent that this is being proposed as a fairly long-term contract, my question relates to any quality assurances or quality metrics that we would include in this contract, either the 5-year or beyond that.
So when I get the actual nuts and bolts of the contract of what Ed has proposed, I'm going to push that out to the board for your review immediately. We are well on the way to having that. So if you could just hang tight for the next couple of days, I will be able to get that information to you. And which would have those specifics, Mrs. Hayward.
Great, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Anything else on the transportation contract?
I will just say I agree with Dr. Scriven. I think we'll have this in the next day or so. And there are already some quality control things in the current contract. I'm assuming most of them are going to stay. So they just have to be pounded out with Ed and Eric.
And I will say, as someone who had some involved. Oh, Ms. Haywood, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I put my hand back up again. Just an observation. And again, I defer to administration with respect to the proposal or proposed recommendation to the board. But a 10-year contract is a fairly lengthy contract, and things can change, as we know, positive or negative in that time span. And so, I just put a note of caution in terms of a long-term contract. I mean, the 5 years seems to be a reasonable period of time, but, quite frankly, we don't know what's going to happen in the next, after those 5 years elapses. So I just put that out there and I know that we're pretty far down the line at this point down the road. But just considering kind of where we might be in 5 years and whether or not we would want to put out the transportation contract for a bid at that point. Just throwing that out there.
Just to clarify a little bit, it is actually a 5-year contract with an option to extend it another 5 years. So the board will have to make a decision probably 5 years from now.
Okay.
And make a decision. The terms would already be there, and you would be able to evaluate how the service has been, how things are going, how the economy is, whatever. And hopefully, if things are just the way they are, you just say, "Oh, this is great." What a great idea Dr. Scriven had of doing 5 and 5, and he's a genius.
Thank you, Mr. Lindeman. I really appreciate that clarification. I was confused then. Thank you.
Mr. Schultz, you put your hand down. You were going to answer that question. And I was going to say that we started this negotiation much farther apart. We got to a point where I think that the accommodations made on both sides came to a very fair, equitable deal that takes into account our taxpayers and our students' needs, and also that Mr. Faust made an investment that he was going to have to go elsewhere to realize the benefit of, and he can stay here, and that's a benefit to him as well. And for all of those reasons, we came to what is a deal that, from my perspective, was well negotiated and comes out fair to everyone involved. So.
And if I just might add one last thing, I hate to extend this. In my 18 months, and I told Dr. Scriven and you yesterday, Joel, it's kind of 16 more months than I thought I'd be here. I've only had to deal with one transportation call. So I think that just shows you have a pretty decent contractor. They do a pretty decent job. There's people that may or may not like the busing for one reason or another, but you you're bussing, when you add all your non-publics and all, you're bussing well over 5,000 kids, and there's going to be a few unhappy ones, but I've had a lot less calls on busing in doing this job than I did doing my prior job, and it was, I thought we did pretty well there. So it's a little kudos to Cheltenham Trans and Eric and everybody over at their bus lot and all, that does good.
Thank you, Mr. Linderman. Was there anything else on your agenda?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, we just, when we talked last week, we wanted to go over just so people may not know, we're changing food service contractors. However, we're not changing prices. The prices will be, starting next year, because the school, the National School Lunch Program and the waiver program, which provided for free, breakfast and lunch all this year and the prior year, is ending on June 30th. Now, lunch and breakfast in the summer is still going to be operated the same. We will still be giving out free breakfast and lunch. And we are working with the township. Mr. Cohen and I had, when we were on the liaison meeting, the end of last week or the week before, whenever it was, we talked to that, and Lou and I are firming up where we're going to be able to have some distribution sites throughout the township, including a couple of our schools. But we wanted to share the lunch prices. This is the lunch prices that will be for when the students come back in September. And they are the same prices as were in the 2021 year, when the last time the students had to pay. And again, the National School Lunch Waiver Program technically ends June 30th. Summer feeding is a little different, and we will be still feeding this summer, starting, I think, the Tuesday or Wednesday, after, whatever the first day back after the 4th of July is, when we start our summer programs. So.
Ms. Mulhern.
Thank you. I just was confused. Wasn't 2020, 2021 also part of the, students not having to pay for lunch?
It was, but we were not in the full-blown program that we're in this year. We were only in the free lunch program, which didn't get us as big of a reimbursement and cost us a little money. Yes, you're right. But
okay, okay, that helps. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Mr. Schultz.
Thank you. So thank you for including this slide, Mr. Linderman. And I wanted to reiterate for anyone who might see this, but also just this is for some families, especially families like mine who had a kindergartner in the first year of COVID and a first grader this year. So the entire 2 years of being a parent, lunches have actually been free. So this is a significant change for some. It will be just back to normal. For some, it'll be a totally, they don't have that back to normal. So my question / comment is just, I imagine this is probably something we should make sure to communicate effectively next fall, so there aren't any families who come in surprised that suddenly they need to have sent lunch.
Yes,
that's all.
And what I didn't include on the slide here is anyone that qualifies for the free and reduced lunch program will still be free and reduced. So it's still 40 cents for a reduced lunch and free if you qualify for the free lunch. So, and that is about 39% of our student population.
Any other questions? Any questions from attendees on this subject? So raise your hand. Not seeing any. Go on.
We did get at Mr. Cohen's, and thank you for the suggestion. Last month, we got a quote from the Montgomery County Commissioners, the Planning Commission, for doing an enrollment and demographic study. We've attached a copy of the methodology that they would use and a copy of the contract with them. It's $8,100, so it is less than half of what we were proposing with the Pennsylvania Economy League. So we're recommending this, and have kind of added it to the agenda too. So unless there's a question, we talked about this pretty much last month. It's just a different, we're going to use Montgomery County. And then this is the onerous list of agenda items for finance. And you saw that going through your agenda build. So you have the budget here. We will add in here somewhere the actual millage proposal of 1.6%. This talks about the property tax relief and the homestead. This is the talks about the installment payments. You have to do this. This is different than your actual payment dates. The installment payments are September, October, November, the last day of the month. That enables people to split their bill in 3. This is the time periods. And last year, yeah, I will tell you, I kind of messed this up last year. I didn't realize how big a deal this was. When I looked at your year prior, when I was doing this last year, I think September 1st was a Saturday the year before. So I thought you were just August 31st or something like that. But anyway, it all got changed. So this reflects that if you were going to have to pay by September the 3rd, you're going to actually get to September the 6th to pay it. And I found out from the tax people at the township last year, they did, this was put in place many, many years ago because of the time frame for discount for people to get their Social Security check in September. Now, I will tell you that there is not a big percentage of people that get their Social Security check September or on the 1st of the month anymore. You generally get it on the date your birthday falls in a month. So I look at, and I just use an example, my father-in-law is 90. He gets his on the 1st because he was one of the last ones that got that. My mother-in-law, who's 88, gets hers on the 11th of the month, which was her birth date. So at some point between 23 and 25 years ago, they changed the rules. So at some point, you probably want to consider getting back into where everybody else in the state does. August 31st is the date you have to pay your taxes by. Again, I wasn't going to deal with that this year. I think it's fine. 50 to 60% of your taxes are paid through mortgage companies that mortgage servicing companies collect, and they're collected usually the 1st or 2nd week of August anyway. So that's just a little background to that. I will kind of let my successor and Dr. Scriven deal with this next year if they want, or just kind of keep going the way you are for all it matters. You have to appoint depositories for you to put your money into this year. So these are the same ones we had from last year. It's an annual thing for us. You have to actually authorize the business manager and assistant to do the investments. And I will tell you that all these investments are done in accordance with 440.1 of the school code, utilizing Act 72 collateral. And basically 440.1 of the school code says we can only invest in instruments that are fully backed by the government. So you've either got to have FDIC insurance, or you've got to be a government treasury type bill or something like that, which is why our interest rates, we cannot just invest in things that Vanguard or Fidelity does. This is the annual thing to ask permission to utilize the cooperative purchasing programs through these different agencies. This is recommending that we are the purchasing agents, in accordance with the 807 of the school code. And we need permission to authorize payment of bills prior to the August 2022 ratification at the meeting. So we will have bills that will need to be paid in July. Since you don't have a meeting, that would give us that. This is the same. This is a budget transfer agenda item that requires us to make the budget transfers, or gives us the permission to make the final budget transfers as required and mandated by the auditors. This is our insurance for next year that is approved every June. The biggest increase is cyber. It was 18,000 last year. It's 24,000. Continues to go up. Continues to be a big worry for insurance carriers. This is after going through the food service RFP. Dr. Scriven and I talked, and you really need somebody that knows a lot about food service. So we're recommending a contract, kind of a retainer with SOS Incorporated, and it would be Barb Nissel. She would be the food service consultant for the year. And those hours would carry over as needed, or if something happens and Dr. Scriven or the new business manager need her for more than 10 hours, then we would have her bill at a little bit higher rate. She's actually the one that recommended we go to the free breakfast and lunch, what was called the SSO program for this current year, which is going to result in us making a good deal of money this year, as opposed to we lost a lot of money last year. So I think it'll pay for itself. This is the kind of long version of the bringing us into accounts, in the student activity funds. So it's kind of what I talked about. The dormant accounts will be closed if they haven't been used for 2 years, and anything that's left over in those dormant accounts after we kind of take the negative balances out and positive will be put in the student government account. So like the student government account at the high school, if there's any money left over, they will get that money deposited there. Sports accounts are closed. Class accounts prior to 2021 closed and transferred to the general fund of the high school. And 2021 class, as I said, will go there. We are going to allow a small carryover. It's like not material amount, $500 to $1,000. And accounts with negative balances are going to be zeroed out, and accounts with excess positive balances are reduced and transferred to the general fund. So that the schools are going to get the accounts, the programs will get to use this next year because it's going to be put into the corresponding school where the accounts are coming from. So, for example, the sports accounts, I would assume they're going to all go into this corresponding sports account for next year. And then this, I talked a little bit about this, an amendment to the Portnoy contract, dealing with some changes made, and there's a schedule. This doesn't really cost you anything, because if you're delinquent with your when you use Portnoy, they basically, if you can't pay your taxes, you pay all the costs associated with us collecting them, or them collecting them for us. And then this is the enrollment and demographic study, which we kind of added here. And then that was it.
Any questions about any of that? Seeing none, I want to thank Mr. Linderman. God willing, this will be his last presentation.
Well, and I would tell you, it was nice to finally meet one of the board members in person yesterday, Joel.
Thank you.
18 months and I haven't seen any of you in person. You're just little boxes on my screen.
Yeah,
so Joel's for real. I'm not sure if anybody else is. I know Dr. Scriven's for real too, but other than that, you guys could be, whatever.
You've gone above and beyond your volunteer duties, and thank you for everything that you've done and all of the extra months that you've spent helping us. Does anybody have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Zachary.
Second, Leah Mohan.
All right. We are adjourned. Have a great night.
Night, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Edmund.
Night.